Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Think and Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint, and today we're going to be talking about Lancastrian Theonomy, or what some people call non-legislative theonomy. And the reason I call it Lancastrian Theonomy is the school of thought of non-legislative theonomy is especially prevalent where we live in Lancaster County. I've seen some people refer to it as Lancastrian Theonomy because this idea of non-legislative theonomy is taking hold in this area with the theonomists around here, and it's an idea that we at Future of Christendom promote. You can visit us at futureofchristendom.org. We just had a conference in Lancaster County, and we just had Dr. Joe Boot speak there. And I've written a book called The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy, or Statism in the Christian Mind, that talks about this idea of non-legislative theonomy. And also Chris Hume, as part of Future of Christendom, has written his book, Seven State of Sins. Matt Kennitzer, who's part of Future of Christendom, has also written, he's in the process of writing a book concerning the matter. And my dad, Joel Saint, and John Bingaman and Dave Stoltzfus, other guys involved at Future of Christendom, we all, in some way, shape, or form, promote this form of theonomy called non-legislative theonomy, or what's being called Lancastrian theonomy. So here in this episode, Dr. Wolfe is going to be talking about his take on non-legislative theonomy, and we'll maybe answer some of his questions, because he asks a lot of questions to no one in particular, really. And we'll take a look at what he has to say, and we'll address some of his concerns, and have a lot of fun doing it. So here we go. Here's Dr. Wolfe.
This would be nice to kind of get comfortable and just talk. And so thanks for joining. Today I am going to talk about, I guess, a controversial topic, apparently. It's going to be on theonomy. Very exciting. And some of the ways to distinguish myself from theonomy. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he's actually a theonomist. I think he'd say he's a general equity theonomist. And it was about an event where we might do some kind of debate or speak about this issue in some way together or with others. And I was thinking about that framing. Is it theonomy versus natural law? Now, a lot of theonomists say that they affirm natural law. I think Doug Wilson has said that he affirms natural law. I've heard Toby Sumpner said that he affirms natural law. And so it's interesting. So I don't know if it's the framing of that is exactly right, if I represent the natural law side. But there is, I think there are differences. But in particular, if you talk about theonomy, there's a certain branch of theonomy, which may be more of a purist theonomy, I suppose. General equity, I guess, can be a little looser in how they do law, I suppose. But probably the purist type of theonomy is I think that's what I'm going to end up debating against. And so I wanted to have some preliminary thoughts as I think through how to approach this topic a bit. And is it really accurate to say that Stephen Wolfe has the theonomic, or has the natural law position? That's the right framing. And as I was thinking about this, I'm thinking that the right framing, like the two sides, it seems to me that the two sides are, it's theonomy, again, of the purest sort. I know there's different versions of it. But on the other side is politics. So it's politics versus theonomy. I know that might surprise and probably offend a few people, but I think that is the difference. It's politics versus theonomy. And I think that at least the purest form of theonomy is an escape from politics. Or to put it differently, it's essentially to eliminate politics.
He's very correct about that. This is exactly one of the goals in non-legislative theonomy, is to not allow people to control other people the way politicians do. It's really to abolish the office of politician. Does that mean all politicians are going to go away? No. I mean, everyone, to some extent, as he'll probably talk about later, is a politician. But it stops the politicians. And when I say politician in this sense, I'm talking about people who have been given control over your life who do not have your best interest in mind. That's who I'm referring to. And this form of government that has been ubiquitous throughout history has always resulted in unjust societies, the creation of widows and orphans. Anytime the more power given to politicians, the less freedom a nation has. So yeah, one of the goals, and I'm glad you said this, one of the goals of Lancastrian Theonomy is to point out that politicians should not be making decisions about how you should act. Right? God has given us everything that pertains to life and godliness, as it says in 2 Peter chapter 1. So that basically abolishes the office of politician, who thinks that maybe God missed a few things and I need to tell you what they are. And if you don't listen to me, you're going to go to prison, you'll get fined, or you'll die, basically. And so yeah, the goal is to abolish politicians, the office of politician. It's not necessarily to get rid of politics. Obviously, in business, you have politics. Anytime you have manners, you have politics. But it's really, one of the goals anyway, is to abolish the office of politician, professional politician.
Now, as you move further away from the purists, I'd say that there is an entrance of politics. But at the same time, I think there still is, even among sort of the moderate theonomists, a tendency to escape politics. So what do I mean by politics? Let me begin by that. So the first thing is, politics is decision. That's what it is. It's a matter of decision. What do I mean by decision? What I mean is that the people, either themselves in like a pure democracy or referendums, but or the legislature, the representatives who represent those people, they deliberate upon something and they make a decision, and that decision is legislation. That decision is law. Law says do this or don't do that, and then it's usually accompanied with that would be some sanction, some punishment, some fine, or whatever it is. But it's a matter of decision. Because in politics and political animal, we being political animals, we look upon our society and we want to engage that society with ideas and with identifying problems, identifying evils, identifying what is good, and goods that we should seek, and then asserting that, that identification, and then from there, try to find means to attain that, try to find means for that to obtain within society. And that's politics, broadly speaking. It's a matter of deliberation and then fundamentally of decision. Ordinarily, it's a decision of a legislature. It can also be an executive if they've been empowered by the legislature to do certain things within a certain limited scope. That would also be a matter of decision. I guess adjudication and judicial branch would also be decision. But primarily that's what politics is. It's the people themselves deliberating in public discourse about the good, about what is evil, and then the means to obtain the good and suppress or eliminate the evil.
If that's what he's talking about, I mean, throughout this video, I think there's a couple times where, I'm not sure if he means to, but Dr. Wolfe seems to give a very pie-in-the-sky view of how politics work. Especially politicians. I mean, listening to that, you'd think, oh, this doesn't sound so bad. But the reality of what actually goes on with politics and politicians and people coming together to make decisions has historically been disastrous. It's just been disastrous. All tyranny is done this way, under this guise of the people deciding, and then what happens is the politicians consolidate power. This happened 100% of the time. Every time you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and they consolidate power, and then they start oppressing their own people. And it has never worked out for a nation. No nation has succeeded with politicians. We always are plunged into destruction. with the aid of politicians. Politicians are there to see it, every nation go down every single time. So, this approach, like all it is just people coming together to make decisions, and he kind of brushes over, well, yeah, there's punishments. That's a very, very pie in the sky view of politics, in my opinion. That's not really how this works. It's not this very simplistic approach. Yeah, if only it were that easy, it would be my rejoinder. That this is like, if you just like make it that simple, if that's what's really going on. What's really going on is corruption on a massive scale, corruption on corruption even down to the local levels, and you'll see later, Dr. Wolfe is going to talk about how this all should function. But I submit to you that there seems to be some sort of out of touchness, if you will, some naivety about how even corrupt the most local politicians are. Do you think your most local municipality? We're going to see later that he kind of gives this very flowers and butterflies approach, and it seems to be out of touch with how corrupt your most basic politician is.
That's just Paul, and the object of it is your political life as a community in society. So it's you centered on yourselves, trying to obtain the good for your people.
That's like it's like communism. We just come together and we provide for everybody, each according to his needs, each according to his need. The people we don't make decisions. The politicians make decisions and use us as the chess piece, and then they send us out to be their providers and their tax slaves and things like that. The people aren't coming together like in a big forum, and we talk, and then we tell the politicians, "Hey, this is what we want," and then they do what we want. That is not what is happening. I'm not sure if that's ever happened in history. Consistently in a community or in a nation, that we don't come together and we tell the politicians, "Here's what we want," and they're like, "Okay," it seems to me to be very out of touch with. And maybe he's just saying this is how it's supposed to be. But even then, if you're saying, "Well, this is just how it's supposed to be," that's still a very naive view of how things go down, even at the most basic and local level. What he's describing here is something that nobody has interacted with in the history of the United States.
So that's politics. That's how politics has always been understood since the very beginning of human society. Aristotle was right when he said that a man is a political animal, meaning that as a not an animal, not people misunderstand. He didn't mean that it's like they're ferocious and they're like ferocious political people. No, it just means that the sort of creature that man is a political being, which means more. Again, it means more than just being in a society with others.
And I submit to you, this is a pitfall of getting your ontology from, what do you say, Aristotle? Okay. He says we're a political animal, and then some other philosopher comes along and says we're not. So now what? We don't build our ontology from guys like Aristotle and Aquinas. We understand who we are from the scriptures. That's where we start with who we are. And I would understand if he's saying this as an aside, but it appears to him to be like foundational. Like, see, politics is important. See, man is a political animal. Aristotle said we're political animals. Okay, but that's not what the Bible says. And we build our ontology of who we are and what our purpose is off of what God has said, and not what Aristotle has said.
It means that you, as a member of that society, engage that society in discourse that hopefully in the discourse, what arises from that discourse is the good of that society. That's what politics is. That's what it's always.
everything that we need to know about the good of society comes from the Bible. It doesn't come from us coming together and figuring everything out, right? His divine power has given to us everything that pertains to life and godliness. That's 1 Peter chapter 2, right? So there's nothing that we need to come together and kind of correct the Bible on the way that the Bible has told us how to live our lives. Everything that's available to us on how to live our lives is already knowable from the scriptures. And I'm not saying that, we have, it's just, we don't need to talk about these things. But there is an assumption in what he just said that we don't know enough for man to live godly lives. We need to come together and figure it out. And I submit to you that the scriptures say, no, you do know enough. He has shown you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That's enough for any society. It's already been revealed in the Old Testament, how to live as a nation, how to come together as a community. It's already been revealed. Not saying the disagreement's over, but there is no need for politicians to tell us what the Bible has already told us. And that's one point of non-legislative theonomy. We've already been shown, we have enough. We don't need politicians to come along and say, well, I know that's what God said, but I'm here to tell you that if you don't have speed limits, society's going to explode or what have you, which we will get into here.
It's been as a matter of decision after deliberation.
But again, that's a simplistic view of politics. Decision after deliberation. It's much more serious than that. We're talking about people's lives here. We're talking about, the loss of private property. We're talking about corruption in the most basic level of government. It's a very simplistic view of that's politics. It seems to me to be out of touch with reality. That's not how this works, Dr. Wolfe. I submit to you that.
Now, on the more pure theonomic side, I recently came across this term called non-legislative theonomy, which means there's no legislation. Which means there'd be no legislature because they'd have nothing to do. And so there'd be no creation of law at all. And in fact, this would render the magistrate or the civil government merely as sort of, at best, a type of delegate from God to enact the laws from the Bible, or at least to apply the laws. It's not even clear that there is an enactment or a promulgation because the laws have already been enacted and promulgated via Scripture. So you don't even, in that sense, you don't need a clear executive. Or if there is the executive has a sort of, at best, like a sort of police force, but not an enforcer, not an enactor, not an executor of laws, apart from the police force side, I suppose.
Yeah, he's wondering aloud here. And so what God's law recognizes is the judicial branch of government, and the executive function is primarily given to the people. It's a man taking his neighbor to court, right? So there is no patrolling and ordering function of the civil magistrate, right? He doesn't go around. I mean, I'm not saying that he can't, but his primary duty is not to go around and look for people breaking the law. That's the job of the citizens to regulate ourselves in that way. When you read the Bible, when God says, I want you to elect judges in Deuteronomy 16, and he does say, the judgment is God's. You have to listen to these judges. The judgment is God's, and it's actually a capital offense to not obey the judges when they make a decision. So the executive function is primarily the citizenry, right? The judges don't go out looking for people breaking the law like the police do. It's the citizenry. As we live our lives, as violations of God's law occur, we take our neighbor to court and say, this man has wronged me or cheated me, or this man is taking advantage of a widow or something like that. And then the judge renders his decision. No legislative branch. Deuteronomy 4 and Deuteronomy 12 Twice Moses says, "Do not add. I'm giving this law. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it." Thereby abolishing the legislative function of that society.
But when I hear some of them talk, it's not even clear that there would be an executive. It would be that there's some sort of injustice or evil occur in society, and then the two parties that are a subject, or that were where the injustice occurred between, or the alleged, would then go before a judge, and the judge would adjudicate based upon scripture on that case, and that's it.
It sounds like he's. It sounds like he's never read the Bible. I mean, it sounds like he's like blindly walking into describing Deuteronomy without knowing that he's describing Deuteronomy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, he's describing how God told the Israelites to do justice. If there's an injustice occurred, then you shall bring forth the offender, as they did. There's many case laws that you can point to where there was no police force, and the people who were wronged, or the people who were witnesses, brought the case before a judge, and they put the man in question in custody, and then their judgment was given. And Dr. Wolfe here is like describing it kind of like maybe like an atheist who never heard of this would just kind of blindly walk in and say, "Oh yeah, I read Deuteronomy, and can you believe that, they didn't really have a legislator, and they would just wait around for someone to commit a crime, and once someone committed a crime, they would bring that person to, I guess, to a judge or something like that." I don't know. I mean, I've never heard of it before. It's really funny to me that he's basically describing what God has told the Israelites to do in Deuteronomy and Exodus and throughout the law, and he seems to be completely unaware of it.
And it would have to be a specific evil prohibited, which would be an injustice to be rectified through judgment. So it's not even clear that there would be an executive who would bring or force one party to be adjudicated. Or perhaps the judge himself would be the executive, and there would be executive judicial combination. Something. It's not really clear to me, but from what I can tell, I
mean, it's funny that's not really clear. You read all about it in Deuteronomy, and you find out the whole thing. But if you read through Job and you find out his executive function, he was a judge, and he would sit down at the gates and listen to people bring their problems to him, and then he would use the law of God to adjudicate. That's what Solomon was doing, even when they created the Israelites created the executive branch by creating a king and legislative branch, frankly, at the same time. Even when Solomon was pleasing the Lord, he was adjudicating. That's it. And it turns out that when he was given legislative power, he really abused it because he enforced a tax, which was foreign to the people of Israel before the establishment of the kings. That's basically, I mean, Dr. Wolfe here, again, just seems to, like, if he would just read Deuteronomy, he would have, it just seems to me, not very familiar with Deuteronomy.
The political system or the governmental system would lack entirely a legislative unit. Now, this means, so on my side, I would say that the civil government, in a way, mediates divine rule. Now, that doesn't mean they mediate salvation as Christ does. It means that they have the power to enact law, to promote the good, and to suppress evil.
See, even in non-legislative theonomy, the claim that mediate divine rule is still applicable because, again, Deuteronomy says you got to listen to the judge, for the judgment is the Lord's. They are mediating divine civil rule. God ties the judgment that they make to his own judgment. I'm not saying that everything that they say is perfect, but they are God's representative, and they are mediating God's judgment through his law. So again, you can read this in Deuteronomy. I'm not making this up. It's surprising to me and shocking that he's asking these questions aloud when several Sunday schools would have answered it, or several readings through Deuteronomy would have revealed all this to him. And the claims become where the questions really become even more bizarre as we go along here.
And in that way, they're a sort of mediator in that they have lawmaking authority. That's really all I mean by that, as a sort of mediator. If you have distinguish this from like a minister. Ministers in church don't have a lawmaking authority. What they have is they take the laws of Christ that apply to the ecclesial or ecclesiastical sphere, and they apply those. They're not allowed to come up with their own ceremonies, their own rituals. They have some governmental aspects where they can set rules and policies. For example, if there's, I don't know, my church recently said that the foyer, something about watching your kids so they don't hit this and break that or something like that. I mean, so they can apply rules like that, but they can't establish rules that pertain essentially to an ecclesiastical body.
That's a great observation. It is very similar, and if you recall in the Reformation, that's a huge part of the Reformation was the people telling the ecclesiastical authority, you are abusing your authority by legislating new sins. That's what a papal bull was. Okay, this is now a sin. That's not a sin. This is now a sin. In the same way that we rejected the Pope as being having the responsibility and authority to legislate new sins, non-legislative or Lancastrian Theonomy rejects the civil authority or the civil magistrate as having the authority and responsibility to make new crime, right? So, we are praying and looking for a reformation in the same way that the church had rejected the ecclesiastical authority and said, I know that you think that you have the right and the responsibility to tell us what is a sin and what is not, but you really don't, because the Bible has told us all that we can know about sin. And so we just need to turn to the civil magistrate and say, I know that you think that you have the right and the responsibility to make new laws where God has not made a law, new crimes, but you really don't, and we need to reject you. So I think the next Reformation, Lord willing, that we have in the West, if we have another one, may the Lord give us one, but it's going to have to accompany, it's going to have to bring forth this idea and telling the state and putting the state in its proper place and saying, you are just have the responsibility to adjudicate. You do not have the responsibility to legislate. And that's a big message of Lancastrian Theonomy.
Okay. So that's different than a civil authority, which in my view would have a mediating authority such that they can create law. Now, they can create law only if it's derived from the natural law or the moral law, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
Again, this is not a biblical claim. You cannot reverse engineer that idea from the Bible. The Bible doesn't make that claim that we are supposed to make laws, that we should be making laws, that it's a good idea to make laws. It doesn't say anything about that, especially coming from a regulative principle guy. We only do what the Bible tells us to do, right? And the Bible in Deuteronomy says, do not add to it, do not take away from it. Who's applying that principle? And we say, we go to the Old Testament for principles, but I want to know who's taking the principle of don't establish a legislator and applying that. So in the idea that he's promoting here, hold on a second.
But if you distinguish all of that from theonomy, there's just there's no legislature. It's not a clear system of executive with judicial, and they have no lawmaking authority at all.
Yeah, like I said, I lost my train of thought there. The Bible has not delegated that responsibility to the civil magistrate, right? Romans 13, he is an avenger, right? He avenges and God's wrath on the evildoer, right? So just the way that the Reformation said to the Pope, you don't have the right to tell us who an evildoer is. You can't make up a new rule about, okay, evildoers now do this and evildoers now do that. If you don't cross yourself, you're now an evildoer, okay? You don't get to do that. In the same way, God has not given the responsibility to the civil magistrate to make new law. That idea of this emphasis he's putting on creating new law, that's not a biblical idea. He got that from somewhere else outside the Bible. And Lancastrian Theonomy seeks to especially challenge people to, okay, all of your theories about life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, everything that pertains to life and godliness, you start with the Bible. And then if you find a good reason to not take the Bible's approach to these things, let us know. But we know that all reason, good reason, is reverse engineered from the scriptures, right? That's how we justify that as good reason, chapter and verse, or chapter and verse people. I mean, we used to be called the people of the book. So I'm not saying that logic and I mean, you can't say anything logical unless you've read the Bible. But the justification for logic and reasoning is tied to the scriptures. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge, right? So this idea of we need to be legislating and we need to have legislators, you cannot read the Bible and come to that conclusion. It never makes that claim. You must enforce that upon the text. So Lancastrian Theonomy really puts a lot of emphasis on get your ideas from the Bible about how the government should work. And then once you do that, you're going to find that the world cannot offer you a reason to step off of that foundation.
Now, this, of course, this is what leads to a lot of theonomists to be extremely libertarian. And I think there's a lot of problems with that. First of all, that's never actually happened. There have been, in ancient Greece, there have been lawmakers such as Solon who had established laws for Athens and then say, I'm going to be gone for 10 or whatever, 20 years. I'm going to go to Egypt. And he, apparently did. And there's you can read Herodotus on his interactions with Pharaoh and all that. But Solon leaves and he says, do not change the laws. I declare you do not change the laws and all that. So there have been kind of examples of that. Of course, eventually Athens did change their laws, and Lycurgus in Sparta had something similar. But nevertheless, for the most part, there's always been some kind of civil authority with legislative power.
It's quite shocking to hear that from somebody who studies political history and would make such a claim that that's never happened. That's a fail as a political science historian and as a Christian. Obviously, the case in point that we refer to is Israel did not have a legislative body for the first 400 or 500 years of its existence. From Moses to Samuel, there was no legislative function. And if you read the scriptures, especially in Judges, the golden days of Israel was in the book of Judges. And I know what a lot of people were saying, but everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It was chaos everywhere. But what we try to point out is that in the book of Judges, the phrase "the land had rest" appears more often than "everyone did what was right in his own eyes." It appears 4 times, and the land had rest for 40 years. The land had rest for 80 years. The land had rest for 40 years, and then had rest for 40 years again. Now, America and any Western culture, any society that has had legislators can't touch that track record. But they did all this without a legislative body. Again, Deuteronomy 4, do not add to it, do not take away from it, right? Deuteronomy 12, do not add to it, do not take away from it. So there was no legislative function. And when Samuel came and they said, we want a king, and Samuel said, okay, don't do this. He was warning them that this guy is going to be basically legislates. One of the warnings is he's going to be legislating. He's going to be taking all your stuff. He's going to be taking all this stuff. And this was supposed to scare them away from doing this, but they were so wicked. They said, no, we still want a king. Even all this, we're going to lose our freedoms. We're going to lose our rights. We still want a politician. We want to be like the other nations and things like that. But it's quite an ignorant statement to say this has never happened. And then he goes to Greece, right, to be like, it's kind of happened in Greece. And again, this is the problem of not starting with your political science theory and reverse engineering that from the Bible, because the Bible obviously before it told us how to be a church, it told us how to be a nation, right? So if I'm a biblical scholar and I want to know how to run a church, I go to the Bible because it talks about how to run a church. And if I'm a political science historian and I'm Christian, for crying out loud, and I want to know how to run a nation, I go to the Bible because it tells us how to run a nation, right? A successful nation, the most successful nation that I can think of. 80 years of rest? Has America ever had 80 years of rest? And not to mention in Kings and Chronicles, that both they both mention that not only was it like physical rest, but it was also spiritual rest, because when Josiah finally throws a Passover, it says Israel never had, even David and Solomon, in the whole history of the kings, they never had a Passover like this, not since Samuel. So, and I think Kings puts it at not since the time of the Judges. So the Judges, and even Matthew Henry says the golden days of Israel was in the book of Judges. And, some of you will say, of course, well, yeah, but, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Well, let me just point this out. It only says that twice about the same story, the beginning of the story and the end of the story. It's at the beginning of the story, it says that, and at the end of the story, it says that. Okay, it's about the same story. It's at the end of the book. Okay, we got to stop judging the whole book of Judges by that one phrase that appears at the end of the book about one story. Okay, we've got to start looking at it more consistently, more biblically. Think about it as the land having rest. It doesn't give any attention to those years of the land having rest. It was rest, and not to mention the judges where they just judge for 40 years or 20 years or something like that, and there's no mention of any war or Israel being carried off. Israel was carried off in the times of the kings, and for those of you who are like, but it was chaos. Israel was never brought into judgment during the time of the judges. It was during the time of the kings, and God faults the king. He says, this Jeroboam guy, I'm taking you guys off because of he sinned and made Israel to sin. Judges couldn't accomplish that. They did not have the legislative power. But once they established a king, gave him legislative authority, things headed south real quick.
To enact laws in all societies. And the reason for that, the very basic practical reason for that, is that some laws become unnecessary over time. Some laws that were just at one point become unjust later, given different circumstances. And so you need flexibility in the laws, and everyone's kind of recognized this.
Except the Bible. The Bible doesn't recognize that idea. Again, we're not building our ideas from the scriptures, right? Or this is a mind that is uninformed from the Bible, at least in this area of political science. Sorry, let me just, I've lost where I was there.
Given different circumstances. And so you need flexibility in the laws, and everyone.
Okay, right. We need flexibility in the laws. Justice is not something, I don't think that the Bible communicates to us that justice is something that changes over time. What's wrong is always wrong. What's right is always right. Right? I didn't say it's expedient. I said what's right is always right. And in Stephen Wolfe's book, he even says that even though the right thing to do is sometimes not the convenient thing to do for the civil magistrate, even though it's the right thing to do, maybe it's not the convenient thing to do. And again, this is a branch of Christian nationalism that Dr. Wolfe promotes, a branch of Christian nationalism that prioritizes order, peace, and convenience. And this branch of Lancastrian Theonomy, and I know a lot of theonomists are behind this as well, just general equity theonomists as well, they're more focused on justice and righteousness in the society. So again, the two branches of Christian nationalism, the theonomists want justice and righteousness established, and it seems to me to be anyway. That's what these tropes and these mantras they keep on coming through, and it just sounds like they're really concerned. This other branch of Christian nationalism, which would be natural law nationalism. They're really focused on order, peace, and convenience, as we'll see here. But again, this is not a biblical claim. What he's making here, that justice changes over time, right? God's law is just; it's always going to be just. There's never a time where it's not going to be just. His laws are perfect, and they're still applicable to today. These are biblical claims. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. But justice doesn't change. And it's a scary thought to think that, maybe something was unjust, but now we know that it is just now. But what about all the people who suffered under that law, right? You pass a law and you find out later, natural law has shown me that was not a just law. Maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But now I've put somebody in prison for 40 years. Sorry, I guess I just didn't know at the time, So that's not a biblical claim that justice is this tangible, flappable, wavy thing out there in the ether that we need to bend to our will, for whatever is expedient and whatever's convenient at the time. That's not a biblical claim.
Everyone's kind of recognized this. And this should become more apparent when you think about what politics does in relation to acting upon society. So you can have things that are kind of bad but not evil in society. You can have things that are evil, and you can have things that are good but not obtained, or things that are good that they want to seek in society. So let's just take the idea of a bad but not evil. One of those would be like take fishing out on the ocean. So in many places there are fishing regulations that the U.S. Coast Guard will regulate because if it's overfished, it will kill the life cycle of the fish. And of course, this is driven by experts on on marine biology and all that. And so the way to understand this is that individual fishermen are just trying to find fish so they can sell in the market. So the individual fishermen are not doing anything wrong. It's just that there's too many fishermen. And so you can have something where the parts are good, but overall the collective action is evil or it's bad, because the whole of something can be bad and the parts can be different. So it's interesting, but each person is not committing evil, but overall they're committing a bad by essentially eliminating the fish to the point that they don't have the life cycle, and it'll essentially kill the fishing for many, many years after that. And so what do? Well, you identify a problem, and you seek through politics, through the legislature, to then enact laws that would secure the good in that. The good would be that there's fish that can be acquired and sold on market, but it's not overfished such that it eliminates that good. And so you have a regulation, whether it's fishing licenses to catch limits, to perhaps the sort of equipment they're allowed to use.
In this scenario, I mean, the point that it would be very inconvenient to lose, all the fish, or bad, and to use his phraseology, bad. Yes, but it would not be immoral. And one thing that Lancastrian Theonomy really tries to emphasize is, for someone to be punished, he must have done something immoral first. And in this case, overfishing an area is not immoral. You've done nothing wrong. Maybe you've inconvenienced other people, right? But this is a historical problem, and never once did someone commit something immoral by overfishing an area and taking advantage of the fish in the ocean. The claim that in Genesis chapter 9, when God says, look, I give all this stuff to you. This is yours, right? Everything I give into your hand, the fish, the trees, the animals, I give it to your hand. So it doesn't belong to a people, right? It doesn't belong to any specific group of people. It belongs to whoever gets their hands on it, right? In the ocean. And then you'll say to me, well, then we're just going to kill all the fish. All the fish are going to die unless we have the politicians, ride in on their, white horses and save the day for those poor fish. That's not necessarily true. In fact, it's not true at all. These are problems that I agree with him that we can come together and make a decision on, and we can regulate in such a way that we're not punishing people who aren't doing anything wrong, right? So for the civil magistrate to act, somebody must be doing something immoral according to God's standards. Otherwise, he does not have the right to tell people, here's how much fish you can have, and here's where you can go fishing, and things like that. That's not his jurisdiction. That's not a responsibility given him by God. We can't make up new responsibilities, because God has shown you what is good, and what does the Lord require of you. Does not require a legislative body, does not require the civil magistrate to come and punish us because we didn't fish where he told us to fish. Okay? These are problems that historically have been solved not by politicians, but by people who are businessmen and who actually have knowledge in that area. Most politicians who make decisions about where people fish have no idea the difference between poop in the toilet and a poop deck. So, this is this pie in the sky thing, like, the politicians will come. That's why we have politicians to solve this. They just make it worse. Okay, they just make it worse. They don't care about the fish. They don't care about the people. They don't care about dominion. They don't care about any of that. They care about staying in office as long as they possibly can, and using this advantage to try and brag about, what they do. That's historically. And you say, oh, no, not all politicians are like that. Yeah, you're right. Not all politicians are like that. But if you're telling me that the only person who can solve this problem is an honest politician who knows about fishing, I'd say there's probably about maybe one of those people who've ever lived in their entire lives. And to sit down and say, that's what we need. Someone who has the best interest in mind and is an honest person and is also a politician. I'm saying this is just a pie in the sky approach the way politics works. This is not how it works. The politicians don't come in and say, well, we're going to save the fish. Politicians don't save fish. They make the problem worse. They see a problem that they've created, and then they come in and make it worse, and then they try to save the new problem, and they make that problem worse. That's the nature of politics right there. You pretend like you've solved the problem, but you've just made it worse, and then you present yourself as the savior to the problem that you've created. So probably a different understanding, definitely a different understanding of how politics work between us and Dr. Wolfe here. But this problem that he's talking about cannot be solved by politics. 100% cannot be solved. They don't know what they're doing in regards to fishing, and getting consultants and all that kind of stuff. It's historically speaking, this doesn't go well. They usually end up killing more animals than they save.
The same thing is like, that's why Fish and Game would regulate lakes and other things, because people overfish. Let's say there's a recreational use of a lake, and it's overfished, which that basically kills the recreational value of the lake. And
this is again coming from a mind that is judging the law of God through statism. He's assuming that the government would still own these lakes, and there would be public property and these rivers, and that people would just be walking onto them and fishing them. Well, that's not really, if you take out the legislative aspect of a society, there is no public property the way that we understand it today. So to import our understanding of public property or government-owned property and then enforce it upon, well, what if there's no legislature? This is a bad idea, is anachronistic especially to this version of theonomy. He's assuming that nobody would own the lake. And if somebody owns the lake, they probably have the lake's best interest in mind, unlike a politician does not have anyone's best interest in mind except his own. He can restock and refill and take care of the lake, have dominion over the lake, which a politician does not have dominion over. He can have dominion over the lake, and he can regulate how the lake is fished, and he can kick people off who he does not want to be there. Obviously, people who would go in there to that lake would pay for the service to fish. It would become a business, and every time that happens, then things would actually start thriving. If this person owned the lake and they're looking after it, and they're watching and tracking how much fish are being taken out and being put back in, this is a problem again solved by business owners, not politicians, who just, again, historically, whenever they get involved, they just make things worse. So again, we can't be looking at this idea of theonomy, this non-legislative idea of theonomy, and using our statism to say, well, here's how it wouldn't work, because I'm going to take my statist view of things and import it upon your idea of non-legislative theonomy and look at all these problems. Well, yeah, there would be problems if you did like this half-cocked version of Lancastrian theonomy and statism combined, which is basically what he's doing here. Again, he's assuming that the government would be in control of the lakes and the rivers in a non-legislative form of theonomy. That's not true. All land would be owned by somebody or something, and definitely not the government.
That's why we have laws related to fishing licenses and fish lengths, precisely to maintain the population of the fish, to maintain the good of recreation. And if those things were not there, then they'd be overfished, and people would take the small fish.
This is a pretty bizarre, claim. This regulation of what fish you can take out is relatively a recent thing in the West, right? When you came over here and there was a bunch of Indians running around, there was no government body measuring your fish. Even at the height of the Indians, they did not have regulative bodies counting everybody's fish. And so this idea, it's surprisingly, it's funny to me that he's making this claim that, if we didn't have the government regulating fish, we wouldn't have any fish anymore, right? They'd be overfished, and we'd be like, we wouldn't have any fish anymore. It's just, where have you been for the last, 5,000 years? I've always had fish, never had a problem of universal, worldly speaking, internationally speaking, of running out of fish in lakes and rivers and streams. Obviously, a regulation of fish it can be done, but it's not the government's responsibility to do that. Let the business people do that. It's like saying, doing this kind of, philosophizing, if you will, is like wondering, what if people make a run on all the toilet paper in Walmart? Well, then we'll run out of Walmart. We'll run out of toilet paper at Walmart, and then people won't have any more toilet paper. So what we need really, you see the problem. What we need really is the government to limit how much toilet paper everyone can buy, so that everyone has an opportunity to buy toilet paper. Because if you don't make a law, then people are so stupid they will destroy themselves without the government coming in and telling them how to do everything. It's again a very naive view of history, and I say this with respect to Dr. Wolfe, and I'm sure he has a response to this, and he can probably explain more what he's thinking and doing here, but I just can't believe that someone could sit back and say, if we didn't have the government telling us, we would run out of fish.
And then they would go, get a bunch of small fish, and that would equal one fish, right, to cook it up, or whatever it is. And that's why you regulate that for the good. Now, individual people fishing, there's nothing wrong in itself from taking a smaller fish, if that's what you want to do. But because of the collective action of people doing that thing, it eliminates the good of recreation for the lake. And so we regulate it. That's a problem identified. Now, we wouldn't need that law if there were few fishermen, or if it's in a lake that's very remote. I've been to remote lakes in Yosemite, and I think they still actually have like length requirements, even in Yosemite. But many of those laws don't really matter, because few people get up to these high off-trail lakes that my father and I went to many years ago. It was a lot of fun. And so you wouldn't even need laws in those cases. In some ways, those laws might be bad laws because there's plenty of fish, and why couldn't someone catch a smaller fish? Anyway, so you get what I mean there. And then, of course, there's evil actions. If there's people who are breaking into cars, which is already illegal, and they're stealing cars, you might need to apply a stricter law, because now there's a problem of evil occurring. And now you need a law to maybe buttress the law that's already in existence, or change the punishment, or whatever it is. In that case, perhaps maybe you just need different policing tactics, which wouldn't be a law. But you get the example where in that case, a problem arose in circumstances, and now you need to apply a stricter law to that situation. And this could be for any number of evils that arise in society. Take how technology changes, and so now you have access to things on the internet, and so that would then need to be the laws would have to be adjusted for the change of circumstances.
One thing that we like to point out is God's law is the only political system that takes into account the changing technology, right? He's saying, with the advent of the internet, you have to probably change a few laws and make a couple new ones. Well, God's law, obviously when God gave the law at Sinai, and David made the claim, "Forever, O Lord, your word is fixed in the heavens." God knew that we obviously would make the internet, but he didn't give us any internet laws, because if we're doing anything wrong, we have to tie it back to God's law. We're committing adultery, we're committing fornication, right? We're being sexually immoral, and that's what we're doing wrong. So God's law is the only political system that doesn't worry about technology and what do we do now that a new technology is introduced. Because if a new technology is introduced, whatever you're doing wrong is still a breaking of basically the 10 Commandments. And that's what you need to judge that technology. That's just basically the 10 Commandments, But God's law doesn't sweat the advent of new technology. Man's law is always concerned about, well, what if the things I'm trying to control get out of hand because someone creates new technology? And this inevitably thwarts new technology, because then we regulate it and then we freeze it. And whenever you regulate technology, you freeze it in place and you basically stop the advent of new technology, which has historically been happening. If you look at the 1800s, inventions all over the place in America, they weren't regulated as much, hardly at all. And through the 1900s, especially the last couple years, the only things that have really succeeded are non-heavily regulated fields. The internet was not regulated. Cell phones were not regulated the way that other fields are, and so they just took off. So the God's law is the only political system or body of laws that doesn't sweat the advent of new technology, because since it's forever and since it's always applicable, and if you're doing something wrong with that new technology, you can point to chapter and verse. But if you can't point to chapter and verse, if someone's doing something wrong, then you cannot punish them, right? So you must first be doing something wrong before you are punished, according to God's word. And that's the nature of the civil magistrate. He is an avenger. He's not a preventer. He's not a protector. He is an avenger. So that's his nature. He waits for something to do something. Somebody's do something wrong. Once they do something wrong, then the sword is brought out, if you will.
And then there's also the promotion of good. This is probably even among moderate theonomists controversial, but there's also the promotion of what is good, which I think having, say, having a law of what side of the road you drive on is one example. You have an example of it's a collective action problem. I want to go from point A to point B. You want to get from point C to D. We cross paths in the process. You and I could want the best for each other. We could have we could.
Again, comes the assumption that without the government telling us what side of the road to drive on, we'd be crashing into each other all over the place. For a long time, the government was not telling us what side of the road to go on, and yet the advancement of cars and continued. For a long time, we did not have driver's licenses. Interesting story. That's how the Amish started driving buggies. If you look into that, that's why they started driving buggies, was the protest over the driver's license. But that was until the 60s. So I suspect that he would make the argument that if we didn't have driver's licenses, we'd be getting in accidents all over the place. And before the advent of the driver's license, people were just dying left and right because we were just too stupid without the government telling us what to do. But this comes from a mind that's really affected by this nanny state. I mean, it seems to me, with respect to Dr. Wolfe, it just seems really that he's really super affected by this, like the government is this caring presence in our lives. It's telling us, and again, he argues for this in this book, telling us how to live our lives, basically, the specific ends. That's the phrase that he uses, the specific ends to achieve the common good. That's a phrase that he uses in his book. So this is coming from somebody who's like, the government is good. It tells you how to live. You need this information because without it, you'd be, crashing into people. You'd be killing all the fish and all this kind of stuff. This is, again, claims not made by Scripture, but they are made by him.
As best we can, try to avoid hindering your movement. And yet, if you have 1,000 people doing all that from different starting points to different endpoints, you need.
And without the government to tell us how to drive our car, we'd be driving it backwards, blindfolded, with no seatbelt on.
Some sort of collective coordination for that to occur. And so the reason why in our streets and most places in America, why people obey the speed limit or obey the various traffic laws, is that it facilitates our collective activity. If no one obeyed it, or if there were no laws, then we would be in a traffic jam.
See, and this is like one of those scenarios, like if someone like Dr. Wolfe was the magistrate of the society, and he was doing what Dr. Wolfe wants the magistrate to do, to order society for the common good, and everyone was horse and buggy, and you brought your new invention, and you said, "Sir, I want to have permission, if it pleases the crown, can I please make and distribute this vehicle? I call it a car." And the magistrate will say, "Well, what is it?" "Well, it's transportation." And then he's going to say, "Well, it seems a little dangerous. You could kill people with that." "Well, yeah, you can." And then he might say, "Well, how many people are going to die from it every year?" And you might say something like a statistic, like, isn't it like thousands, like 20, 30,000 people in America die from vehicles every year? Maybe that's a light number. Maybe it's 100,000. I don't know how many people die or are injured by vehicles, but it's a lot. And then after hearing that, the magistrate will just be like, no, you can't do that. And it's a good thing that people like Dr. Wolfe are well, they are actually. It's a tragedy that people like Dr. Wolfe are in charge, and people are coming up with these new technologies all the time. And for the good of the community, these people are rejected because it's my decision to either allow or disallow this new technology, and you're too stupid to have this technology and use it in a way that is beneficial to the society. So I'm going to make the decision for you, since you're too dumb, obviously. So, this is just a mind that's like this nanny state needs to be telling us we need to be asking for permission because we're just too dumb. We'd be in a traffic jam if there wasn't any government telling us how to drive our cars. It's like, man, thank goodness Walmart has federal regulations telling it where to put the men's section and where to put the women's section and where to put the bathrooms and where to put the sports section. Because, I mean, if not, all the Walmarts would have it in different places, and I'd walk in there just completely confused. I'd probably walk in there and walk right into the auto section first thing and probably think I was at an AutoZone. I mean, we can't have that. So thank goodness the government is definitely telling Walmart, hey, here's what you need to have in your store, and here's where you need to put it. Because if not, we'd be in this, like, we wouldn't know what we were doing. This is from a man who does not respect the fifth government that doesn't get talked about enough, which is business.
All seen videos or pictures of a third world traffic jam where there might be laws, but no one's committed to obeying the laws. But anyway, that's seeking to solve a collective action problem. You have other things like septic systems. So I live out in the country, and there's permits. If you're going to dig a well, you have to get a permit. I mean, that's different from a septic, but if you're going to dig a septic system, it's also a well. So, well, I should talk about that first. So for like a well, there's a water table. You could buy a place. A developer could with goodwill develop houses in this area, but there's no city or county water to that place, so they have to dig a bunch of wells. They might be very meaningful. They might think there's plenty of water in the ground, but they just don't know. And so they build houses with wells, and eventually no one has water, or there's a water shortage for everyone in the entire area because this guy, as well-intentioned as he was, built 100 houses in 100-acre lot or 50 acres, whatever it was, and sucked the ground dry from water. And that's why you'd have a county ordinance, and that county ordinance would say that you have to have, or that they would regulate the consumption of water, and that probably would mean like the size of the lot you can build, or perhaps whatever it is. But there would be regulations and permits associated with that to ensure the good that everyone has water. So with septics, you could be well-intentioned and say, look, I'm going to put my septic here. The leach field's out there. It doesn't affect anyone. That's not adjacent to another property or another house, or it's downhill away from everyone. Yeah, and you think you might be well-intentioned, but you just and the average person might say, yeah, that's a good spot for a septic. But it could be there's things that you just don't know.
And that's what the average person does. They install their own septic systems. They don't hire experts to do that.
Right there, did you know there's underground water, whatever it is, and this water will go into this, and this will affect the people downstream. Or if, hey, there's a creek here, and if we build 1,000 houses right here, and there's no county water, then guess what? You're gonna have to, that sewage is gonna have to go somewhere, and it's gonna go into the water system. It's gonna have this and that, and you just don't know it. And so you have people who do public administration, who know these things, whom we put public trust in, and we hope that they as administrators would do the job. And generally speaking, people do their jobs, at least in the United States. I mean, we can highlight all the corruption, fraud, but there's a lot of officials at the county level who do their job well, at the city level who do their job well, and this is regardless of politics. And so
again, this is a pie in the sky approach. What if we have septic problems? Again, the nature of non-legislative theonomy, anytime there's a problem, you take your neighbor to court and say, hey, this man is contaminating my water with his septic system. He did not do his research. He did not consider that he might be damaging me. And after I talked to him, he has decided that he's not going to make restitution towards the property damage that he's doing to my house. And then the judge will adjudicate the problem and say, okay, are you damaging this man's property? Evidence, 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay, you are. Okay, you've got to stop. And if you don't listen to me, I will make you stop, because you are doing something wrong, because there are laws that talk about in Deuteronomy that if you're affecting someone else's property, you're the one at fault, right? So the God's law has already accounted for this problem that he's talking about here. And if he would have just read Deuteronomy, he would have seen the laws about property and who's responsible and who's at fault and things like that, and how judges would adjudicate the matter. But what he doesn't talk about is the negative aspect of all this legislation, because right now, if I build a house and my septic system starts destroying my neighbor's property, and then my neighbor takes me to court and says he's destroying my property, and I show the inspection report, and I show the laws that I can do this, guess who's going to be on my side? Man-made legislation is a double-edged sword. I mean, these guys, especially like Dr. Stephen Wolfe, it's a werewolf that they think they can control, but it always comes back to bite them. Because if I have an inspection report, and if I can legitimize what I'm doing through their law, then the judge is going to side with me and make a victim out of my neighbor. Even though if you could find all the time, and again, this Amos Miller case is Exhibit A of this, of the fallout of what Dr. Wolfe is talking about. The Amos Miller case, he was selling raw milk. Government said he can't do that. Brought it to the court. The judge said, did you or did you not sell raw milk? Amos Miller said, yes, I've been selling raw milk. The judge says, okay, my responsibility is not to use my head and think about this and think about neighbors and things like that, because nobody's made a complaint. It's just the state making the complaint. There's no victim, but you've broken the law. And so now you must be punished, right? So it doesn't matter when you start making laws, you start making victims of innocent people right away. And that's what Dr. Wolfe has failed to really consider here when you start doing this thing. Like, this is all going to be pie in the sky. Like, we don't have septic runoff because the government has made all these rules and regulations. That is not true. We actually have a lot of abuse through these laws, much more abuse than we do the opposite. I think 70 million dead babies would agree.
And I think that we just don't recognize how much of our lives and have been regulated by the government, and actually some of that has actually been good. And it's local. So it's town, county, and state. They are doing these things. And so anyway, there's these problems that politics identifies. Politics is identify a problem, deliberate upon it, and enact the best possible good or law that you can to obtain the good. I don't know how theonomy...
Again, not a biblical claim, what he just said there. You can't reverse engineer that from the Bible. You can from guys like Junius and Aquinas, but they didn't get that idea from the Bible.
The purest form of theonomy can do that. I don't know how it can deal with, one, collective action problems. I don't see how it can do things like speed limits. Part of it too is that you can only, like, theonomy would only attack acts of evil that are evil in themselves. Okay, so... Yeah,
that's partly the point. No one's allowed to tell you what's evil outside of what the Bible has revealed to us. Right? That's the point, just to stop people from making up new rules and redefining evil over and over again every 10 years.
Things that in themselves are non-evil cannot be regulated. So...
Well, they will be regulated, just not by the government, right? When I go into Walmart, it says no shoes, no shirt, no service. That's their rule. If I try to get in there, I will be kicked out quite lawfully. Scripturally speaking, lawfully, I can be kicked out by the business owner. It's their property. They can make whatever rules they want. When it comes to speed limits, again, this idea of, well, the government didn't make speed limits, then we'd be speeding. Well, people are already speeding. Nobody follows the speed limit. Are you kidding me? People don't follow the speed limit, and there's accidents all over the place. What are we talking about here, man? Nobody follows the speed limit. Half the time they're ridiculous anyway. And they're out of touch with the reality of where technology is and where how cars of 60, 70 years ago can't handle the loads of cars today. Like, cars are much smoother, they're much safer, right? And they're able to withstand much more abuse in some cars, and they're able to go much faster, safer. So the speed limits don't take these things into account. And so you have people breaking the speed limit law. The speed limits are a joke. But when I walk into Walmart, it's no shoes, no shirt, no service. We all know this. But that's not a law. That's their own regulation. Regulation happens through business. When people desire something, they will express their concerns. This has always happened throughout history. And the business usually listens, if not always, listens to their concerns, and then they make and they adjust according to the regulative principle of the customer. And if you have roads, if enough people complain, then the business owner will put speed limits in. Just good business, right? He wants your money. He wants you to be on his road. If you're paying to be on that road, he's going to listen to what the customer has to say. But people won't be doing that because business owners will be much more practical in the way that they control and regulate the roads. That's how it was before the government started to pretend like they're the ones who invented road regulation. So private business owners will be regulating the roads, just like they regulate Walmart. If I walk into Walmart with no shoes, no shirt, they kick me out. If I go onto a private road and I start acting up, they'll kick me out.
And you cannot actually be punished until you commit an injustice.
Again, that's part of the scriptural ontology of the civil magistrate and avenger.
Itself. That's unjust in itself, which means you can't have speed limits.
You can have speed limits. It's just who's enforcing them. The business owner, the person who owns the road, the person who has the best interest of the road in mind, or the government, some politician in office who's never been on the road. Someone who's charging you to be on roads that you'll never set a tire on. That's what's happening right now. They're charging us for roads that you'll never set a tire on. That's who's controlling the roads. They're out of touch with reality. They're out of touch with the people. Business owners are not. They're beholden to their customers. That's who would be regulating the roads. Again, a mind affected by statism.
You do a speed limit and you give a guy a ticket. There's nothing wrong with you going in itself, with you going 60 and a 40 in a place that was once 40 miles per hour until the Theonomy showed up. There's nothing in itself wrong with doing the 60 miles per hour until you maybe hit someone or hit another car or whatever it is. And so you have to wait until someone...
Are NASCAR drivers sinning? I just want to know. They're going super fast. They're being super dangerous. Are they in sin? As soon as you become a NASCAR driver, you're doing all the things that he's talking about here. You're being dangerous. You're going super fast. The only difference is the government says you can do that there, but you can't do it here. Only difference. Are they being sinful?
Someone hits a kid, or someone hits a dog, or someone hits another car, or whatever it is, someone hits a house or whatever, before you can actually act against that person, which means that everyone...
That's again called the concept of innocent until proven guilty.
Can drive as fast as they want. Again, all the traffic regulations that facilitate our movement from place to place have to be thrown out. I don't know how they...
Like I said, like he's wondering aloud, how can you have the government controlling roads but there be no speed limits? But again, a mind affected by statism will ask that question. He's thinking in terms of statism, of the government controlling roads but not having speed limits.
Deal with like different ideas of sewage systems, of lakes overfishing. Would they prevent a guy in a river from using a net to catch fish? Most places that's illegal. And why? Because let's say there's salmon coming up the river. I don't think it's wrong in itself to use a net to catch fish. But that could lead to the destruction of the salmon population because that's how they go up to spawn. That's how they...
Right, that could lead, right? That could lead. Here's some bad things that could happen. Right, and so let's punish you before that happens. But that's again not a scriptural. That's not an idea reverse engineered from the scripture. God never gave the civil magistrate that responsibility to punish people before they do something bad.
They repopulate. Would that be against the law? Could you find a way? And also, who? Can you identify the clear victim there? Like who's that individual victim?
None.
Can there be a class action where it's like the whole community now is a victim and therefore they're a party to the case? I guess perhaps you could do that. But is the act in itself an act of evil to use a net? Let's say the guy used a net once, he gets a few hundred fish, and it doesn't actually affect the rest of the population. It actually he was able to sell a few hundred fish. That doesn't seem evil in itself because the salmon can still keep populating. Now, if 100 guys do it, they follow, hey, look what this guy did. Another 100 guys do it. Well, each individual case is fine because it's okay for a guy in itself to go use a bunch of nets to catch a bunch of fish. But if 100 or 150, 200, 500 people do it, they eliminate all the salmon. Well, who committed the evil? Well, collectively they did. Okay, are you going to try all of them? Can you try a collective group of people?
Well, I mean, who did the evil? There was no evil committed. Salmon being depleted from a river, there's nothing evil about that. It's just inconvenient for the time.
People who at the individual level did not actually commit an injustice in itself. So these are the various problems. And also the other problem is, and I could just go on and on with examples about that.
But think about the examples he's bringing up here. His what about? So what about this? And so far we've heard about what if we deplete all the fish? What if our septic and sewers aren't so great, and we maybe affect some water, or we take up too much water in a given community? And what about our speed limits? That's his concerns, but it shows you what that branch of Christian nationalism is concerned with. Again, I said before, they're concerned with peace, order, and convenience. And most of these have little to do with peace and order and have mostly to do with convenience. That's his whatabouts. Well, if we have non-legislative theonomy, things will be really inconvenient. The theonomists are trying to solve the problem of what do we do when the government starts attacking their own people? What do we do when they march on us, as has happened in America, for not paying our taxes? What do we do when they abolish the right to private property through income tax and property tax? What do we do when we start murdering our own children? Those are our whatabouts that we're concerned with, that we're trying to solve. His whatabouts, and as you'll see later, his whatabouts are, what if we run out of fish in a certain area? What if there are no speed limits? Who's going to control the roads? And what about septic systems? And as you'll see later, what if an ugly warehouse goes up across from my nice, cute neighborhood? I'm not joking you. These are the whatabouts. Just compare and contrast. The theonomists are concerned about justice and righteousness in the society. This branch of Christian nationalism is concerned about convenience. And if you don't believe me, just keep listening. He's shown that he's really concerned about convenience above all else.
And the other problem is that it eliminates politics.
That's not a problem.
It eliminates
how's that a problem? Biblically, how's that a problem?
People observing their community, engaging in deliberation upon the good. It eliminates all that. It eliminates decision. It also eliminates the ability to deal with circumstances. So let me focus on that. Yeah. So it eliminates politics as decision because it reduces all of governmental action to judging based upon the law book of the Old Testament or of the Bible in application of specific cases brought before a judge. So again, there's no legislature. It's not clear to me that there's an executive. There's only a sort of adjudication of the law already established. Yeah. And so it eliminates politics entirely. All there is just a judicial decision by judges. The other issue with judges, who appoints a judge? Are they voted in office?
Again, here he brings up his whatabouts, and it's all related to convenience.
How long is their term in office? Is it for life? Where is his jurisdiction? Is the jurisdiction from here to here? Can you establish jurisdictions in a theonomic system? Isn't that establishing a law? Say this is your jurisdiction and you cannot violate it? What are the terms of him being removed? There's all these issues that if you cannot legislate, you can't even enact your own system.
That doesn't require a legislation for them to make up the rules of how the government functions. Does not require like a law, right? So if a judge serves longer than what he was supposed to serve, do we punish him for doing that? That'll be up to each nation to decide through their basically their constitutions. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's our procedure, and that's what the Constitution was supposed to be, just a procedural document. It wasn't, but it's just supposed to be procedural. That's what a true Constitution is supposed to be. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's our school of thought on how we're going to apply God's law to a country. Now, let me read to you Ruth 4, chapter 7, this is in the days of the judges, no legislative body. Now this was the verse, Ruth 4, verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the right of redemption and the exchange of land to establish any matter. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. And then it goes on to describe how that happened with Boaz and the kinsman redeemer and all that. No legislative body, yet they came together. They did everything that he wants politics to do without establishing a politician to enforce this idea upon everybody else. They had customs, they had manners, they came up with all this. I mean, I think even the Mishnah is a whole book of the traditions established from the law. Just they're supposed to be just traditions, but they, kind of through the Talmud, they end up being law, right? But they're just supposed to be traditions, I think, if I'm understanding the Mishnah correctly. So, according to all his problems, he's making up these problems that the Bible doesn't tell us this is going to be a problem. In Ruth 4, during the time of the judges, they were regulating themselves with customs. And it seemed to be very successful because, again, they had all this peace. The golden days of Israel was the time of the judges. I don't see how you get 80 years of rest and have all the problems that he's talking about here. So I'm thinking these aren't really problems that we need to make laws about. If the Bible doesn't address it, then we should not be making law about that kind of thing. We should be regulating ourselves, but we don't necessarily need laws. Again, how in the world did they come up with this system of customs to regulate themselves without making a law? Well, they did it. And if they did it, we can do it too. I promise you it'll be a lot easier with cell phones.
So it's self-contradictory. The purest form of theonomy is self-contradictory.
Again, if you just read through the book of Judges and read through Deuteronomy, they were doing everything in your worst fever pitch nightmare of like, oh no, there's no legislator and there's no politics. They're doing it, and they were doing it well. If you would just read the book of Judges and read through Deuteronomy, you'll see they were doing it, and they were doing it quite well. Ruth 4 again, they were regulating themselves. If you would just read your Bible. This is, again, a mind affected by statism. This is not a mind that meditates upon God's law day and night. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. Does that describe Dr. Wolfe to you? Anything that Dr. Wolfe has ever said, would that describe him? His delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. Are we dealing with somebody who's like that?
It cannot establish its own system because it can't provide the rules and regulations surrounding its own functions.
Just read the book of Judges, read Deuteronomy. That's what they were doing.
You can't adjudicate because you have no actual way to establish a judge. If you're going to establish if you're going to install an individual into a judgeship, then how long is his term? Is it for life? How do you remove him? What's a process to remove him?
All questions of convenience and expediency, and not necessarily regarding justice.
What's the adjudicative process? Is there a checks and balances? Is there a court of appeals? Is there a Supreme Court? Let's say there's one district. Let's say somehow you come up with a way to make districts. You have one judicial district determines this. Let's say it's like a dispute between this county and that county because of water. This county wants to build a dam. This county doesn't want you to build a dam because it's going to affect something about their river because the river passes through there, okay? This judge over here says it's good. This judge says over here it's not good. So you can't do it, okay?
Now, the claim of the Bible is that the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. If God's law if the law and the prophets hang on those two commandments, this problem of he's describing here can be solved. Whatever problem you can come up with can be solved using God's law. As we see Solomon, when the two prostitutes came before him and they said, this baby's mine, this baby's mine. There was no law regarding that situation. Yet Solomon had enough to adjudicate correctly. And there was no law, and he didn't make a new law saying, okay, and from now on, anyone who brings a baby to me, I'm going to cut it in half. Yet these problems, the Bible never talks about, if there's a prostitute who says the baby's hers, and in the middle of the night, another prostitute grabs it and says hers, here's what you'll do, cut it in half. Solomon didn't need the Bible to give him a specific law concerning that thing in which to love God and love his neighbor. Everything that can be known about loving God and loving your neighbor especially in regards to how my dam is going to affect other people, the problem can be solved through adjudicating and applying God's law as is. That's the claim of the Bible. Unfortunately, it's not the claim of people like Dr. Wolfe.
So who's going to adjudicate between those two districts if it affects that? Is there a Supreme Court?
If for anyone who's wondering, just read Exodus 18. You'll find the answer to most of these questions. The process that Jethro gives, that's what they established.
That can then hear appeals. What if different courts disagree on the same basic matter? What if it's the same issue and two judges disagree? Is there
That happens right now. I'm not sure what the point is.
Supreme Court that will decide between them? So there's all sorts of problems. It sounds simple, it's nice, so the government's not going to tax you, the government's not going to be in your business.
The government's not going to institute injustice. The government's not going to be killing their own babies. The government's not going to be stealing from you. You're going to be left unmolested by the civil magistrate. That doesn't sound nice. That sounds pretty freaking great and conducive to our purpose as Christians to take dominion. I'm not sure how we can keep taking dominion and have politicians rule at the same time.
But you can't actually produce a system. You can't have a functioning system.
Israel, judges, you heard me say it before, did it. Read your Bible, Dr. Wolfe.
Because you can't build the rules and regulations that permit it to function at all.
Again, the rules and regulations, he's importing that into life. That's not a biblical claim that we need all these rules and regulations. Everything that pertains to life and godliness has been given to us. That's a claim of Peter. He has shown you, O man, Micah 6:8, what is good and what is Lord required of you. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Everything we need to know is already in the scriptures. Biblical claim. We don't know enough. The Bible doesn't tell us enough. Not a biblical claim.
And that's why you need to go back to politics.
Not a biblical claim.
Politics, again. I mean, Calvin says this in one of his commentaries, like, yeah, liberty's good. Like, having a Republican form of government is a good thing. And yet some people need monarchies. Sometimes you need other political forms, other political systems. This is what the founders believed too, is that America can do a sort of experiment in liberty because of their unique circumstances of self-government, their history of self-government, the fact that they came over from ships and they established in the wilderness their towns and they had town covenants, and they had a tradition and a political life of self-determination, of self-government. They were prepared for it and they were ready for it, and that's why America's been successful.
Relatively successful. I mean, we've killed 60, 70 million of our own people. I don't think history is going to view us as successful in that regard. You know, we've committed a lot of injustices. Again, when we compare ourselves to the way that government's supposed to be, as outlined in the book of Judges and Deuteronomy and Exodus and Leviticus and all the things, and in the law of God, we have not been successful. In fact, with the Whiskey Rebellion reveals that we were marching on our own people. As soon as this government was established, we were marching on our own people for not paying taxes. To say nothing of the Alien and Sedition Acts and the Embargo Acts. I mean, and from every president, I mean, the tyranny has been rife all over this country. We've been more successful than other countries, and I'm thankful to be and proud to be an American, because we had a strong emphasis and we wanted life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and we tried to secure it, but unfortunately we went too far from biblical law and too far from what God has told us to do, and into our own, ivory towers and, our own recesses and our own navel gazing to find that out. And so the American experiment is not going to age well, not when you kill 60 or 70 million of your own people. The Christians in the future are going to judge us very harshly for that. And all of the rah-rah America stuff it's not going to age well. The American experiment has not been successful. Because you can't have the nation killing its own babies and establishing the government that we established and be successful at the same time. I'm going to pause it here, and I will probably have to make a part 2 in this response, because I just don't want this to be too long. So thanks everybody for listening. Hopefully in the next couple of days I'll get another one out and finish responding to Dr. Wolfe's musings on non-legislative theonomy, or as we call it, Lancastrian Theonomy. So thanks for listening, and always remember, think and reform.